Ethan Hale had never expected his quiet life as a systems engineer to become the center of galactic attention. The orbital hub, spinning silently above Earth's atmosphere, was bustling with activity as representatives from dozens of alien species mingled, laughed, and argued in tones he couldn't always understand. Humans had only recently been accepted into the Galactic Union, and the excitement on the station was almost unbearable for him. He preferred machines over crowds, codes over chatter, and schedules over surprises. But nothing in his careful, structured life had prepared him for the notice he was about to receive. He had just finished calibrating a power converter in the engineering bay when a soft chime echoed through the station, signaling a summon to the central administrative deck. Frowning, Ethan wiped his hands on a rag and glanced at the communicator. "Ethan Hale, report to the Union administration immediately," the voice said. It was polite but carried the authority of someone who expected obedience without question. Ethan sighed. "I guess my quiet evening is over," he muttered. He took the nearest lift and rose through the hub, passing groups of aliens that looked at him with curiosity and subtle suspicion. Even after weeks on the station, he was still treated like an anomaly. To them, humans were unpredictable. Dangerous even in ways they didn't understand, and it seemed the Union intended to do something about that. The administration chamber was vast, taller than any human building he had ever seen. Holographic screens floated midair, displaying charts, species hierarchies, and laws written in a dozen languages at once. At the far end of the room, several figures turned to face him as he entered. One of them, tall and insectoid, extended multiple limbs in what he assumed was a formal greeting. Another, a sleek blue-skinned creature, tilted her head as if analyzing him. Then in the corner, a small figure stepped forward. She was tiny, barely waist-high by human standards, with skin that shimmered a soft lilac and eyes far too large to be human. Her hair floated slightly as if she existed in a different gravity, and yet she walked toward him with the poise of someone who was in full control. Ethan froze. There was something unsettling about the directness of her gaze. "Humans are required to have a wife," she said, her voice calm and precise, almost mechanical, "and I've been assigned to you." He opened his mouth to protest, but nothing came out. Was this a joke? Some bizarre alien custom he had missed in orientation? Wait, what?" he finally stammered. The small alien girl tilted her head. "You will accompany me as a bonded partner. This is a legal requirement for your species according to Union Law 17.32b. He had read about the Union's regulations, but nothing about forced partnerships, marriages, or bonded partners. He tried to make sense of the sentence of the situation and failed spectacularly. I don't even look I'm human. Humans don't, we don't. This is insane. Your species does not form permanent bonds as easily as others. That is why the Union has assigned me. I am fully adult by my species, standards, and capable of this role. You will comply. This is kidnapping or slavery or something like that. You might even be seen as hostile. You understand the risk. I am not here to harm you. My purpose is to ensure your species remains stable and accepted. Resistance is unnecessary. Cohabitation, emotional support, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. The Union expects compliance within 3 standard rotations. He tried to imagine his life over the next days, working in the engineering bay, eating bland rations, and having a tiny alien girl following him everywhere. It was absurd, ridiculous. And yet, as he looked at her, her eyes calm and unwavering, he realized she was deadly serious. For the next several hours, Ethan tried every possible tactic, logical argument, pleading, intimidation. He explained human law, human marriage customs, human psychology. He pointed out that humans formed bonds voluntarily and that nothing in Union law could override consent. Lyra listened patiently, occasionally tilting her head and asking questions that made him feel like he was exposing his deepest fears. "You fear loss, yet you protect aggressively," she observed. "You bond through choice, yet the Union assumes humans are unstable without assignment. How do you reconcile?" She was here to make the Union understand him, and perhaps make him understand himself. By the end of the day, the chamber was empty except for him and Lyra. She stood silently, her eyes studying him as he tried to relax. He wondered if he should leave, but a faint voice inside him, a cautious, human voice, warned that resistance could escalate things dangerously. "You will need to report to your quarters," Lyra said finally. "We will begin observation and bonding tomorrow. Prepare for compliance." With a resigned sigh, he followed her down the gleaming corridors of the orbital hub, noticing the whispers of other species as they passed. Some looked at him with curiosity, some with awe, some with fear. He wondered what they were thinking. Did they understand humans at all? Probably not. They had assigned Lyra to him because they assumed he needed guidance. They had judged an entire species based on incomplete understanding. And yet, as absurd as it seemed, he realized the truth. They had no idea what humans were capable of. That night, Ethan lay on his narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling panels that simulated the Earth sky. Lyra sat cross-legged on the floor, quietly observing him. He wasn't sure what she was measuring, heartbeat, breathing, stress, but he could feel the intensity of her gaze. For the first time, he admitted it silently. He was curious about her, too, about what she could teach him and perhaps what he could teach her. He didn't know if that was allowed or even wise, but it was a human thought. And humans thrived on curiosity, even in the strangest circumstances. Outside, the orbital hub continued its silent rotation around Earth. Humans were now part of a vast, complex universe that didn't understand them, and perhaps never would. But Ethan knew one thing: if Lyra was going to be assigned to him, he would need to learn fast, not just to survive the Union's laws, but to survive himself. Because humans were dangerous, not because they were violent or unstable, as the Union feared, but because they were stubborn, clever, and fiercely protective of those they chose to care about. And if the Union thought a tiny alien girl could control a human, Ethan suspected they were about to be very, very surprised. Ethan woke to a soft, almost musical chime echoing in his quarters. He groaned and rolled over, wishing he could pretend this was all a strange dream. Instead, he found Lyra already sitting cross-legged near the small window, her large eyes trained on him with the same calm, unreadable expression she had worn since their first meeting. "Good morning," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Your species uses the term morning. I am adapting to local time. Deviations from expected behavior will be noted. Do you consent to begin observation?" "Happy now." She accompanied him to the engineering bay, where he struggled to explain to her why humans sometimes ignored procedures for efficiency or intuition. "You are inefficient," she observed during one pause, watching him reroute a power feed to avoid a minor system shutdown. "Your species relies on error to correct problems. This is fascinating. Sometimes it saves more time than following protocol." She wasn't giving orders or interfering with his work. She simply watched and noted, like a scientist studying a rare specimen. And the more she watched, the more Ethan realized that he, too, was starting to watch her. There was something about her calmness that was almost infectious. When she tilted her head or asked questions in that precise, thoughtful way, Ethan found himself thinking more carefully about his own actions. Not because she demanded it, but because he wanted to. By midday, Ethan's patience was wearing thin. He had explained human social customs, ethics, and habits countless times. He had argued, pleaded, and, frankly, yelled, but Lyra remained unshaken. Her expression never changed. "Why are you so calm?" Ethan finally asked. "Don't you ever get frustrated?" "So you're basically a walking, talking, very small supercomputer that looks like a kid. Your physiological responses are consistent with stress, irritation, and uncertainty. Your comprehension is adequate." He noticed that while Lyra was observing him constantly, she never touched his tools without permission, never corrected his work unnecessarily, and never mocked him. If anything, she seemed protective. When a larger alien engineer, an amphibious species with slick blue scales, stared too long at him during a routine check, Lyra stepped closer to his side without saying a word. The presence of her calm confidence made Ethan feel safer. Ridiculous, he thought. He was human, trained to rely on his own skills, yet somehow the tiny alien girl had become a strange anchor. By afternoon, the station's other residents had begun to notice. Whispers followed him through the corridors. Some aliens watched with curiosity, some with amusement, and some with what Ethan assumed was fear. He had heard rumors before. Humans were seen as unpredictable, aggressive, and too emotional. And now, the galactic community had a front-row seat to a human under observation. Lyra didn't speak for most of this period, letting him interact with others as he would naturally. She simply recorded reactions, body language, and conversational patterns. When a quarrel erupted between two alien species over docking schedules, Ethan intervened, calmly analyzing the problem and suggesting solutions that worked for everyone. Lyra nodded approvingly, quietly noting the results. It was during that moment, When Ethan realized he was being observed, yet still behaving naturally, that he understood something important. Lyra wasn't there to control him. She was there to show the Union exactly what humans were capable of when guided, yes, but not forced. Dinner was a strange affair. Lyra followed him to the mess hall, where Ethan tried to find a corner where she wouldn't notice his messy eating habits. But she simply observed, eyes wide and precise, as he spooned food onto his plate, spilled a little on the table, and muttered complaints about the flavor. "You are less delicate than I expected," she said finally, breaking the silence. "You also appear capable of enjoying nourishment without decorum. This is interesting. Your behavior is acceptable for bonding purposes. You will see the distinction in time." He lay on his bunk later that night, Lyra sitting silently nearby, and thought about the day. She hadn't spoken much beyond her usual observations, but somehow, simply having her there had changed him. He had noticed patterns he would have ignored, paused before reacting in ways he normally wouldn't, and considered the feelings of others more carefully than he ever had. It was exhausting, yes, but also enlightening. Humans were often judged by other species as chaotic, dangerous, and unpredictable. But Ethan realized that humans were capable of something remarkable: adaptability. And he had just seen a glimpse of how powerful humans could be when someone, or something, actually tried to understand them rather than control them. At some point, he drifted off to sleep, exhausted, yet unable to stop thinking about the tiny alien girl who had turned his life upside down. She wasn't a threat. She wasn't trying to dominate him. She was merely watching. And in her quiet, persistent way, she was making him confront the very essence of what it meant to be human. Outside the window, Earth rotated silently below, a blue and green sphere suspended in the void. Ethan knew that his life, and perhaps the fate of humanity, was now tied to this strange, precise little alien who claimed to be his assigned wife. It was absurd, ridiculous, and terrifying. And yet, as he finally closed his eyes, he couldn't help but wonder. Maybe this was exactly the challenge humans needed. Maybe, in the presence of a species that did not understand them, humans could show what they were really capable of. And maybe, just maybe, this small alien girl would be the one to see it first. The morning light filtered through the wide observation window of the orbital hub, casting pale patterns across the floor. Ethan Hale rubbed his eyes and sat up slowly. Lyra was already awake, sitting near the edge of his bunk, her lilac skin glowing softly in the artificial sunlight. She tilted her head, her enormous eyes fixed on him with that same calm intensity. "Good morning, human," she said. "Your stress levels have stabilized since yesterday. Observation may continue. You will experience it whether you like it or not." Ethan felt it before he even heard the alarms, a low, urgent vibration running through the station. Red lights flashed, warning sirens screamed. Ethan froze. "What now?" he muttered, gripping the edge of the table. Lyra didn't flinch. She simply turned her head toward the holographic display that floated above the center of the mess hall. The screen showed multiple red indicators, alien vessels approaching the station, weapons charged and shields failing to respond fully. "Hostile entities are detected," Lyra said calmly. "They are moving faster than standard protocols predict. Your species must respond." But then he saw the creatures in the observation feed, sleek, sharp, and moving with lethal precision. They were not just attacking the station, they were targeting humans. The instinct that had defined humanity for millennia kicked in. Ethan's fear transformed into action. He ran toward the engineering bay, Lyra following closely as the sirens screamed louder. Engineers and aliens scattered, yelling incomprehensible orders, but Ethan ignored them. He moved to the control panels, running calculations and rerouting power to reinforce failing shields. "Your approach is inefficient," Lyra commented from behind him. "You are improvising. This is risky." Every instinct, every late-night coding session, every drill and simulation had prepared him for moments like this. He adjusted a power node with a flick of his wrist, sent emergency energy pulses to the station's defensive arrays, and manually sealed airlocks that the automated system couldn't reach in time. Outside the observation windows, alien ships darted like predatory birds, their weapons cutting arcs of red across the station's hull. The station shook violently as the first blasts landed. "Ethan," Lyra said quietly, almost in admiration, "your actions are remarkable. You prioritize protection over self-preservation. That is consistent with bonding behavior." The station was groaning under the attack. Panels were sparking, alarms were blaring, and humans and aliens alike were scrambling for cover. Yet, as chaotic as it was, Ethan noticed something extraordinary. Humans were still thinking. They were communicating, coordinating, and improvising. Fear was present, yes, but it was being channeled into determination. He ran through the corridors, checking each failing system. In the central hub, a group of alien engineers had frozen, unsure how to respond. Ethan barked orders, directing them to reinforce bulkheads, seal corridors, and prepare emergency energy conduits. Slowly, the chaos began to organize itself. Lyra followed, silently observing as he worked. "Your species is capable of cooperation under stress," she noted. "The Union assumed humans were volatile and dangerous without oversight. You proved them wrong." When one section of the station was breached, he personally operated emergency controls to isolate the hull breach and vent the atmosphere safely. Every move he made was calculated, yet seemingly chaotic to anyone observing without understanding. Lyra stayed close, occasionally suggesting minor adjustments, but mostly recording his every action. She noticed his tendency to improvise, his uncanny ability to prioritize lives over procedures, and the sheer stubbornness that refused to yield to logic when lives were at stake. At one point, a smaller alien engineer shouted a warning. A boarding party had breached a lower level. Ethan didn't hesitate. He ran to the breach, throwing himself into the fray with whatever tools and weapons were available. He coordinated defensive teams, set traps, and used environmental controls to turn the station's layout into an advantage. Lyra followed silently, occasionally darting ahead to predict movements or prevent critical errors. She didn't fight in the human sense. Her species had other ways of defending themselves, but her presence was a stabilizing force. Ethan realized in the heat of battle that she was not controlling him. She was observing, learning, and quietly supporting his decisions without interference. Hours later, the alien ships began to retreat. Ethan was exhausted, sweat dripping into his eyes, but the station still stood. The damage was serious but not catastrophic. Human teams had organized defenses, alien engineers had followed his guidance, and somehow the station had survived. Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable, but he felt something almost like approval. "Your species is formidable," she said. "You adapt, protect, and improvise. Your unpredictability is a strength, not a weakness. The Union's assumptions were incorrect. You are not dangerous because you lack supervision. You are dangerous when those you protect are in danger." As the station's alarms quieted and emergency lights flickered back to normal, Ethan noticed the reactions of other species. Some were staring in awe, others whispering rapidly among themselves. The narrative about humans being dangerous and unpredictable was shifting right before his eyes. Lyra remained by his side, silent for a long moment. Then she spoke softly, almost to herself. "They expected humans to fail. They expected compliance or chaos. Neither occurred. Humans are remarkable." This tiny alien girl, who had been assigned to him against all sense and reason, had witnessed his species in its rawest form, and had not flinched, had not judged, and had not interfered. As they moved through the station, checking damaged systems and coordinating repairs, Ethan realized that something had shifted. Lyra was no longer just an observer. She was a witness, and witnesses had power. She could tell the Union the truth about humans, and for the first time he felt a glimmer of hope that the Union might finally see humans as they were: clever, stubborn, adaptive, and loyal to the very end. By evening, the station was partially restored. Teams worked tirelessly to repair hull breaches, reroute power, and replace damaged systems. Ethan, exhausted but alive, finally sat down in a quiet corner. Lyra sat opposite him, her large eyes still fixed on his face. "You performed above expected thresholds today," she said. "Your species has demonstrated the ability to remain functional under extreme stress, to protect others, and to improvise solutions without supervision. This is significant data. This day will be recorded in Union history." Humans had survived, yes, but more importantly, they had proven something crucial. They were not weak, unpredictable failures. They were a species capable of brilliance, loyalty, and courage beyond what most others could comprehend. And in that moment, as the station hummed with repair activity and distant stars twinkled through the observation windows, Ethan understood something profound. Lyra had been assigned to him not to control him, not to teach him, but to witness humanity at its finest, and perhaps to show the Union exactly what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. Ethan glanced at her, and she returned the look with her calm, unreadable expression. No words were exchanged, but a silent understanding passed between them. Humans were not here to be guided, assigned, or restrained. Humans were here to endure, to adapt, and to protect those they cared about, no matter the cost. And if the Union thought a tiny alien girl could define their limits, they were about to learn just how wrong they had been. The orbital hub was quiet the next morning, but the tension lingered like an invisible fog. Repairs were underway, but the station still bore the scars of the attack: scorched panels, flickering lights, and corridors that smelled faintly of burned circuits. Ethan Hale moved through the station with a measured pace, checking the progress of human and alien repair teams alike. Every now and then his eyes flicked to Lyra, who followed him silently, recording data without interruption. She seemed calm, almost serene, despite the chaos they had endured just hours before. Ethan paused at a junction where the walls were scorched black. He ran a hand along the metal surface, shaking his head. "I still can't believe how close we came," he muttered. "If the shields had failed just a little more." "Your actions prevented catastrophic loss. That is the measure of your species' capability under threat. The Union did not predict this outcome. Observation has concluded. Recommendations are pending review by the Union Council. Observation confirms humans operate effectively under self-guidance when bonds are threatened. Union regulations may be revised. Humans are no longer classified as high-risk unstable without oversight. Your performance has been noted favorably." It was a rare victory, one that didn't require firepower alone, but courage, ingenuity, and loyalty. That afternoon, a message arrived from the Union Council. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing the pale, crystalline form of the council representative. Her voice was smooth, formal, but carried a weight of respect that surprised Ethan. "Mr. Hale, your actions during the recent engagement have been reviewed. The council has observed your species' response under extreme conditions. Reports indicate humans are capable of self-regulation, cooperation, and protection of others when bonds are present or threatened. Consequently, the Union will no longer require assigned bonded partnerships for humans. This classification is revoked. You and your species have demonstrated that your bonds, whether formed naturally or through choice, are sufficient to maintain stability. Further interference by the Union in human social structures is unnecessary and prohibited. You have exceeded expectations. But yes, your species demonstrated exceptional capability." That evening, the station's common area was alive with conversation. Aliens of multiple species exchanged stories, repaired equipment, and debated the day's events. Ethan moved among them, checking on repairs, offering guidance, and quietly observing. He noticed subtle changes in how others looked at him and his human companions, not fear, not suspicion, but a mixture of curiosity and respect. Lyra followed closely, her large eyes flicking from person to person, recording reactions. Ethan noticed something in her gaze that made him pause. She wasn't just observing humans anymore. She was observing everyone, gauging how the Union's perception might shift after what had occurred. "Do you ever get tired of all this observation?" Ethan asked her quietly as they passed a section where alien engineers were carefully reconstructing a control panel. "Observation is not tiring," she replied. "It is necessary. Accuracy must be maintained. However, I am learning to appreciate the unpredictability of your species. This is engaging." "You're impossible. I thought you were supposed to be a strict bureaucrat, and instead you sound almost entertained." "I'd say terrifying, exhausting, and brilliant would also work." The Union's assumptions about humans were no longer valid. Humans were no longer just another species to be managed or monitored. They were a force, not because of weapons or technology, but because of their loyalty, ingenuity, and ability to protect those they cared about. And Lyra, small and calm as ever, had been the one to witness it firsthand. Later, Ethan sat in his quarters, exhausted but restless. Lyra sat opposite him, eyes fixed on his face. "What happens now?" he asked. "Are you free to leave, or do you stay with me because of what happened?" "I am free to leave." She had seen the strength and determination that made them who they were. "I see," he said slowly, "and you can choose to stay if you want. Right, no rules, no Union orders." "I wish to continue understanding it, not because I am assigned, but because it is informative." Lyra remained at his side, not as a supervisor, not as a bureaucratic tool, but as a witness and companion. Ethan found himself explaining small human customs, habits, and quirks that he had never thought to share. Lyra listened, asked questions, and occasionally challenged his assumptions, but always respectfully. One evening, as they sat together watching Earth rotate slowly beneath the station, Ethan realized how much had changed. Humans had survived impossible odds. They had proven their worth to the Union, and in the process, he had come to understand something essential about himself and his species. Humans were not defined by rules, by oversight, or by assumptions. Humans were defined by choice, loyalty, and the bonds they formed with those they cared about. And Lyra, small, calm, and precise, had been there every step of the way, not to control him, not to command him, but to witness it, to understand it. And in doing so, she had become something more than an observer. She had become a part of that truth. Ethan glanced at her, and she met his gaze with her large, unreadable eyes. No words were necessary. A quiet understanding passed between them, one born of shared experience, trust, and survival. The Union could dictate laws, assign partners, and enforce regulations, but humans had shown something that no rule could contain: the strength of choice, the power of loyalty, and the brilliance of humanity itself. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt at peace. The station was damaged, yes, and the future remained uncertain. But humans had survived, and they had done so on their own terms. And that was something no alien law, no Union edict, and no assignment could ever take away. Outside, the stars shimmered against the black expanse of space. Humanity had proven its value not through obedience, but through courage, ingenuity, and connection. And in that vast, silent cosmos, Ethan realized that humans were no longer just another species. They were a force, capable of surprising even the most calculating minds. And Lyra, assigned to him at first by law, had chosen to stay, not because she had to, but because she saw the truth. And that truth, Ethan knew, was far more powerful than any regulation. Humans were unstoppable when their bonds mattered. The orbital hub had settled into a calm rhythm, but for Ethan Hale, life was far from quiet. Repairs were mostly finished, supplies replenished, and the hum of activity returned to its normal cadence. Yet there was a new energy aboard the station, a sense of possibility, of respect earned, and of boundaries redrawn. Humans were no longer seen as fragile, dangerous, or unpredictable. They were acknowledged, cautiously admired, and most importantly, free to define themselves. Ethan moved through the central corridors with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in weeks. Lyra was at his side, not assigned, not mandated, but by choice. She moved with quiet grace, her large eyes observing the subtle interactions around them, noting every gesture, every word, every sign of cooperation. Unlike before, she did not record him constantly or offer unsolicited guidance. She simply existed alongside him, a companion in the truest sense. "Do you ever get tired of being observed?" Ethan asked casually as they walked past a group of alien engineers repairing a bulkhead. "I am no longer required to observe humans," she replied. "Now I choose. Observation is a choice. Engagement is informative. Your species remains fascinating." Fascination captures interest without emotional bias. She listened carefully, sometimes tilting her head in ways that made him feel as though he were under a microscope, yet she never intruded or judged. It was different from before. There was no requirement, no mandate, just curiosity and choice. One afternoon, a message arrived from the Union Council, delivered via a shimmering holographic display. Ethan activated it cautiously, half expecting more bureaucracy or convoluted demands. But what appeared was different. The crystalline form of the council representative, her voice calm, measured, yet carrying an unmistakable respect. "Mr. Hale," she said, "the council has completed its review of human actions during the recent engagement and subsequent recovery. It is our assessment that humans are a bond-centered species, capable of self-governance, cooperation, and exceptional loyalty under threat. This classification grants humans autonomy from previously imposed bonded assignments. Your species has demonstrated qualities that may influence interstellar relations, alliance strategies, and training methodologies. Effective immediately, humans are recognized as independent participants, to be treated as equals and not subjects of supervision. This is consistent with human ingenuity and resilience." In the days that followed, Ethan began to notice the subtle but profound changes among other species aboard the station. Aliens who had previously avoided him now approached with questions, seeking guidance or insights from someone who had faced danger without panic. Some even asked for demonstrations of human techniques in problem-solving or resource management. For the first time, humans were not merely tolerated, they were valued. Lyra accompanied him during these interactions, not as a supervisor, but as a witness and companion. She asked questions, sometimes sharp, sometimes thoughtful, and often prompted Ethan to explain the reasoning behind human choices. With each interaction, he felt a growing sense of pride, not only in himself but in his species. Humans were remarkable, not because of laws, assignments, or orders, but because of their loyalty, adaptability, and courage. One evening, as the station rotated slowly against the backdrop of distant stars, Ethan and Lyra found themselves alone in a quiet observation lounge. The view of Earth below was breathtaking, a blue and green sphere shimmering in the void. The silence was comfortable, punctuated only by the faint hum of the station's systems. "You've changed a lot since the beginning," Ethan said quietly. "Not just me, but everyone, humans, aliens, even the Council. I never thought a tiny alien girl assigned as a partner could make such a difference. You make it sound like I'm a science experiment." She had been there in every critical moment, not to control him, not to enforce rules, but to witness, understand, and record the truth of humanity. And in doing so, she had become more than an observer. She had become a companion, a choice made freely rather than forced. "I'm glad you stayed," he said finally. "Not because the Union made you, or because it was your job, but because you wanted to. I wish to continue learning, not because I am assigned, but because it matters." Over the following weeks, life aboard the station settled into a new normal. Humans and aliens worked together more efficiently, and Ethan noticed a shift in the way other species approached interactions. Respect replaced suspicion, curiosity replaced fear, and collaboration replaced doubt. He found himself explaining not just engineering or tactical procedures, but human approaches to problem-solving, cooperation, and empathy. And Lyra was always there, not as an enforcer, but as a companion, listening and questioning, learning and observing. One evening, after a long day of system checks, repairs, and interspecies coordination, Ethan and Lyra found a quiet spot in the observation lounge. The vastness of space stretched endlessly before them, dotted with stars and the distant glow of planets. Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them here, the initial confusion, the absurdity of assigned bonding, the chaos of attack, and the eventual triumph of human ingenuity. "You know," he said, breaking the silence, "I never thought a law, a rule, or some bureaucratic assignment could teach me anything about humanity, but somehow it did. We were forced to confront ourselves, to act, to survive, and in the process, we changed perceptions. Not just the Union's, but maybe even our own. That is the essence of your species' strength. That is human nature." They were unpredictable, yes, but in ways that created resilience, loyalty, and courage far beyond the Union's assumptions. Lyra's presence reminded him of that truth daily. She had been assigned to him at first by law, but she had chosen to stay. She had witnessed humanity at its finest, and in doing so had become a part of it, not as a tool, not as a supervisor, but as a partner in understanding, learning, and choice. Ethan turned his gaze toward the stars. Humanity was no longer defined by assumptions, regulations, or fear. They were defined by their courage, their adaptability, and the bonds they formed with those they cared about. And for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be human, to act, to protect, to persevere, and to choose freely in the face of any challenge. Lyra's soft voice broke the silence. "Your species is remarkable. I am fortunate to witness it firsthand. This is significant. And I'm glad you stayed," he said quietly. "Not because the Union assigned you, not because you were required, but because you wanted to. That makes all the difference." It is enlightening. And in that realization, Ethan understood something he had never known before. Strength was not measured by power alone, but by loyalty, courage, and the ability to protect and cherish what mattered most. And as the orbital hub continued its silent rotation around Earth, Ethan and Lyra sat together, not assigned, not mandated, but by choice, witnesses to humanity's true potential, and living proof that the power of choice was stronger than any law, any regulation, or any assumption. For humans were unstoppable when they acted for those they cared about, and Lyra, the small alien girl who had once been assigned as a wife, had chosen to stay, not out of duty, but out of understanding. And in that choice lay a future brighter than any law could dictate, a future defined not by assignment, but by freedom, loyalty, and the bonds they forged together. Humanity had survived. Humanity had triumphed, and humanity had chosen.